The husband stood on the stand, confident, yet tearful and resolute. He simply could not believe his wife could do it.
I can't see her doing something like that.
Until the video plays. The woman he had vowed to love and protect, once a respected crime scene technician, was now accused of something unthinkable. At the center of it all was someone she had once called a close friend. What unfolded next stunned everyone in the courtroom, leaving even the judge speechless. The moment was so overwhelming that the sentence was handed down immediately after the verdict, without delay, without hesitation.
I'm going to sentence you to life with a mandatory minimum 25 years.
This is the moment when belief meets evidence, when love collides with facts, when a marriage is put on trial alongside a murder. Because this isn't just a courtroom drama. This is the real story of Ashley MacArthur, a former crime scene technician, accused of killing her closest friend, and hiding the truth so well, even her own husband never saw it coming. Welcome to Detective Rex, your destination for real, gripping true crime stories. Before we dive in, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our investigations into the cases that shock, intrigue, and captivate. Your support helps us continue uncovering the truth behind the most compelling real-life mysteries. Before Taylor Wright became a name whispered in news reports and courtrooms, she was a woman defined by discipline. She understood the rules. She understood the procedure. She understood the consequences. Taylor began her career in law enforcement, trained to observe what others missed and to remain steady when situations turned chaotic. Policing shaped the way she moved through the world, methodical, alert, and always aware that small details mattered. She carried herself with confidence, not arrogance. Competent, without needing to announce it. But law enforcement was only the first chapter. After leaving the police force, Taylor transitioned into private investigation, a field that demanded independence and resilience. As a private investigator, she worked cases that required patience, discretion, and persistence. She wasn't reckless, she wasn't impulsive, and she wasn't the kind of person who disappeared without warning. Those who knew her described the same traits again and again: intelligent, self-reliant, and fiercely protective of the people she loved, especially her son. At the time she vanished, Taylor's life was under strain, but not unraveling. She was in the middle of a divorce, navigating the emotional and legal fallout of a relationship coming apart. Alongside that divorce was a custody battle over her young child, a process that demanded structure, stability, and constant communication. Every decision mattered. Every missed call mattered. Every unexplained absence mattered. Taylor also faced financial pressure. Legal fees mounted. The uncertainty of custody proceedings weighed heavily. These were not unusual problems, but they were serious ones, the kind that required careful planning, not disappearance. Despite everything, Taylor remained engaged with her life. She showed up, she stayed in contact, she handled responsibilities head-on. Which is why what happened next raised alarms almost immediately. In early September of 2017, Taylor made a decision rooted in caution, not fear. She withdrew a large sum of money from a shared account, money connected to her divorce settlement, and entrusted it to someone she believed she could rely on. The decision wasn't reckless, it was strategic. She wanted the funds protected while legal matters unfolded. That trust would later become one of the most devastating choices of her life. Then, suddenly, Taylor went quiet. No gradual withdrawal. No warning. No explanation. Messages stopped. Plans went unanswered. Her routine vanished. For someone in the middle of a custody case, silence wasn't just unusual, it was dangerous. Taylor knew the stakes. She knew that disappearing could be used against her in court. She knew that absence could cost her time with her child. And yet, she was gone. Those closest to her noticed immediately. This wasn't Taylor needing space. This wasn't Taylor unplugging. She didn't miss obligations. She didn't drift out of reach. She didn't leave people guessing. When messages finally came from her phone, something felt wrong. The tone was distant, flat, unlike her voice, unlike her patterns, short reassurances that didn't reassure at all. The words didn't sound like a woman under stress, they sounded like someone trying to end questions quickly. As hours turned into days, concern hardened into fear. There were no confirmed sightings, no travel records, No financial activity beyond what had already been accounted for. No movement consistent with someone choosing to walk away. And critically, no preparation. Taylor Wright did not pack up a life. She did not secure long-term plans. She did not say goodbye to the people who mattered most. The first signs became impossible to ignore. This was not a woman running from her problems. This was not someone starting over. This was not a disappearance by choice. Something had interrupted her life mid-sentence. And the people who loved her understood that truth long before investigators said it out loud. Because Taylor Wright knew how investigations worked. She knew what evidence looked like. She knew how disappearances were judged. And she knew exactly what silence meant, which made her absence speak louder than anything else. By the time law enforcement began retracing her final movements, one fact stood above all others, clear, unshakable, and deeply unsettling. Taylor Wright had not vanished into uncertainty. She had vanished into someone else's hands. To understand how Taylor Wright disappeared, investigators had to look closely at the person standing nearest to her when she did. Her name was Ashley MacArthur. On the surface, Ashley appeared to be an unlikely suspect. She wasn't a stranger drifting at the edge of Taylor's life. She wasn't a casual acquaintance. She was someone Taylor trusted, someone she welcomed into her personal world at a time when trust was becoming increasingly rare. Ashley and Taylor shared more than friendship. They shared professional proximity, shared experiences, shared understanding of how law enforcement worked and how investigations unfolded. That connection created familiarity, and familiarity bred confidence. Ashley had previously worked as a crime scene technician. She was trained in the fundamentals of forensic science, how evidence is identified, collected, preserved, and interpreted. She understood what investigators look for. She understood what mistakes leave behind. She understood the difference between noise and proof. That background mattered. Crime scene technicians are not casual observers. They are taught to read environments the way others read language. Disturbances, patterns, absence, all of it tells a story. Ashley's training gave her access to that skill set, and with it, a deeper understanding of how crimes are solved. It also gave her insight into how crimes can be concealed. To the outside world, Ashley's experience made her appear reliable, rational, capable. To someone like Taylor, navigating legal pressure, emotional stress, and financial uncertainty, Ashley represented stability, someone who understood the system, someone who spoke the same professional language. Taylor didn't just trust Ashley emotionally, she trusted her practically. When Taylor withdrew a large sum of money connected to her divorce settlement, she made a calculated decision to place that money in the hands of someone she believed was dependable, someone who knew discretion, someone who knew consequences. Ashley was that person. That decision was not impulsive. It was rooted in shared history and perceived competence. Taylor believed Ashley would safeguard the money until legal matters were resolved. There was no indication, at the time, that this trust was misplaced. When Taylor vanished, that same trust initially shielded Ashley from suspicion. Investigators did what they always do in missing person cases. They started with the last known contacts, the last known movements, the people who had seen Taylor most recently. Ashley was one of the first individuals questioned. From the beginning, she presented herself as cooperative, calm, willing to answer questions. She didn't resist contact with law enforcement. She didn't avoid interviews. Her demeanor did not raise immediate red flags. In fact, her background worked in her favor. Ashley spoke the language of investigations fluently. She understood terminology. She understood process. She understood what officers needed and how to provide it. Her explanations were organized. Her responses appeared measured. To detectives, she didn't look like someone hiding something. She looked like someone who knew how the system worked. And that created a dangerous illusion. Because knowledge does not equal innocence. Ashley's forensic training meant she understood how evidence is built, but it also meant she understood where investigations are vulnerable. She knew that timelines can be shaped, that narratives can be steered. That certainty takes time. She knew that early impressions matter. At this stage of the investigation, there was no physical evidence tying Ashley to a crime. There was no body, no confirmed scene, no overt sign of violence. Taylor Wright was still classified as missing. Ashley's role was framed as that of a concerned friend, someone who had spent time with Taylor, who offered explanations for her behavior, who suggested that Taylor may have needed space. That explanation didn't immediately collapse under scrutiny. People under stress do withdraw. Divorce and custody battles can overwhelm even the strongest individuals. But there was a quiet tension beneath Ashley's cooperation. She was close enough to know Taylor's habits, and yet, some of what she described didn't align with what others knew to be true. Still, without evidence, inconsistency alone was not enough. Investigators continued gathering data: phone records, financial records, location history, surveillance footage, the kind of evidence that doesn't rely on memory or interpretation. And slowly, that evidence began to shift the frame. Ashley's forensic knowledge had allowed her to present a version of events that sounded reasonable. But reasonableness only lasts until facts arrive. And facts are indifferent to training. The deeper investigators looked, the more Ashley's proximity to every critical point became impossible to ignore. She wasn't just a friend. She wasn't just a witness. She was positioned at the center of Taylor Wright's final known movements, her finances, and her digital footprint. The very skills that once made Ashley appear trustworthy now raised a more troubling question. What happens when someone trained to uncover truth decides to manipulate it? Forensic knowledge, when used ethically, exists to serve justice. But outside the law, it becomes something else entirely, a tool that can delay answers, obscure responsibility, and exploit the assumptions of others. Ashley MacArthur knew how investigations unfold. She knew what buys time. She knew what creates doubt. And she knew how long silence can protect a lie. What investigators would soon discover is that Ashley wasn't just adjacent to Taylor's disappearance. She was woven into it, and as the evidence continued to surface, the trust that once protected her would become the very thing that exposed her. September 8, 2017 did not begin as an ending. There were no alarms raised that morning, no emergency calls, no frantic messages. For those who encountered Taylor Wright that day, it appeared, at least on the surface, to be another step in an already complicated life: meetings to manage, pressures to juggle, decisions to make quietly. By that point, Taylor was under strain. Her divorce was ongoing. Custody matters involving her young son were unresolved. Legal and financial responsibilities were closing in from multiple directions. Yet despite that pressure, Taylor had remained engaged with the people around her. She kept appointments. She returned messages. She stayed connected. That is what made what followed so immediately unsettling. On that day, Taylor spent time with Ashley MacArthur at a property connected to the MacArthur family. This was not an unfamiliar environment. It was not a public venue. It was a private location, controlled, secluded, and known to Ashley. Investigators would later establish that this meeting was not random. Taylor trusted Ashley. She had reason to believe she was in the company of a friend, someone who understood discretion and privacy, someone who had professional familiarity with law enforcement and investigative processes. What occurred during that time would not be witnessed by anyone else. There are no confirmed third-party observations of Taylor leaving that property, no security footage capturing her departure, no verified sightings placing her elsewhere afterward. That afternoon would become the final confirmed moment Taylor Wright was seen alive. Later that evening, messages began to appear sent from Taylor's phone. At first glance, they seemed to explain her absence, but something about them felt wrong. The tone was cold, detached, uncharacteristic. Taylor was known for clarity and professionalism, but also for warmth and directness. The messages sent that night lacked those qualities. They were brief, distant, inconsistent with how she communicated, especially during periods of stress when she normally reached out, not withdrew. Those messages did not ask for help. They did not explain the circumstances. They did not reflect urgency or emotion. Instead, they created distance. As hours passed, the silence grew heavier. Taylor failed to appear for planned commitments. Calls went unanswered. Messages were not returned. For someone in the middle of legal proceedings and active parenting responsibilities, that kind of disappearance was not typical behavior. Concern escalated quickly among those who knew her best. And then investigators began checking the systems that leave footprints. There were no rideshare records showing Taylor had requested transportation away from the area, no evidence of taxi use, no digital trace suggesting she had arranged travel. There were no verified travel bookings, no bus tickets, no flights, no hotel check-ins, nothing indicating she had left Pensacola or planned to disappear voluntarily. Her phone did not show movement consistent with someone relocating, no long-distance travel patterns, no gradual geographic shift. Instead, its activity suggested stasis or control. Financial records showed no additional withdrawals beyond what was already known. No spending patterns consistent with starting over or going into hiding. Taylor Wright did not behave like someone leaving her life behind. She behaved like someone whose life had been interrupted. As investigators aligned timelines, one fact hardened into certainty. Ashley MacArthur was the last confirmed person to see Taylor alive. This was not speculation. It was supported by location data, witness accounts, and Ashley's own statements. There was no verified contact with anyone else after that meeting. No independent confirmation of Taylor's presence anywhere beyond that point. That reality shifted the investigation. Because when someone disappears without movement, without planning, without preparation, and one person stands at the final intersection of time and place, that person becomes central. Not guilty by proximity, but impossible to ignore. Ashley's prior cooperation was re-examined. Her statements were revisited against emerging data. The messages sent from Taylor's phone were scrutinized not for what they said, but for what they avoided. And slowly, investigators began to see that September 8, 2017 was not simply the day Taylor vanished. It was the day control changed hands. The day communication stopped being authentic. The day movement ceased. The day every trail narrowed instead of widened. Taylor Wright did not leave Pensacola. She did not step away from her responsibilities. She did not vanish by choice. Whatever happened to her began and ended on that day, at that place, with the person she trusted most standing beside her. And as evidence continued to accumulate, investigators were forced to confront a darker possibility. Taylor Wright didn't disappear. She was erased. By the time investigators reached the next phase of the case, Taylor Wright had been missing long enough for hope to give way to procedure. This was no longer about waiting for a phone to light up or a door to open. It was about data. Because even when a person is silenced, their digital footprint often is not. Cell tower records became one of the first points of clarity. Analysis of Taylor's phone activity placed her device near the MacArthur family farm after the time she was last seen alive. This was not a high-traffic commercial area. It was rural, private, and geographically inconsistent with any explanation that involved voluntary travel or routine movement. The phone did not show the kind of pattern associated with relocation. There was no progression from tower to tower, no outward trajectory. Instead, the signal lingered, briefly, then stopped. That alone raised concern. But what followed raised alarm. Phone records revealed interactions between Taylor's phone and Ashley MacArthur's phone after Taylor had already been reported missing. Messages were sent. Data was exchanged. Yet Taylor herself was no longer communicating with anyone else in her life. The implication was stark. Taylor's phone was active, but Taylor was not. Investigators then turned to financial records. The money Taylor had withdrawn, the funds she believed were being safeguarded, did not remain untouched. Instead, those funds were traced. They were withdrawn. They were moved. And they were deposited into an account controlled by Ashley MacArthur. This was not an administrative error. It was not an accident. It was not consistent with temporary protection or holding money in trust. It was a transfer of control. At this point, the narrative that Taylor had simply stepped away collapsed entirely. People who disappear voluntarily do not hand over their finances while severing all personal contact. They do not go silent while their money keeps moving. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. It was converging. Then investigators obtained surveillance footage. The footage documented purchases made shortly after Taylor's disappearance. Items that, on their own, might appear ordinary, but in context, were anything but. Concrete, potting soil, materials capable of altering land and concealing disturbance. The timing of those purchases mattered. They occurred after Taylor was last seen alive, after the uncharacteristic messages were sent, after her phone activity began to contradict her absence. These were not household items bought weeks earlier or stockpiled for unrelated projects. They were acquired when the investigation was still in its earliest phase, when urgency would have been highest for anyone attempting to hide something permanently. With digital, financial, and physical evidence aligning, investigators sought judicial authority. A search warrant was executed on the MacArthur family farm. The location itself offered both opportunity and isolation. expansive land, limited visibility, no immediate neighbors watching daily activity, a place where ground could be disturbed without drawing attention. What investigators found there ended the search. Beneath the surface, concealed deliberately, was a shallow grave. Taylor Wright's remains were discovered buried under concrete, soil, and blocks layered in a manner that suggested intention, not haste. The concealment reflected knowledge, an understanding of how remains decompose, how odors travel, how surface disturbance might appear over time. This was not random burial. It was calculated. Identification followed through personal effects. Among them was Taylor's distinctive necklace, an item known to those closest to her, unmistakable, personal, and irrefutable. There was no longer any uncertainty. Taylor Wright had not vanished. She had not left her life behind. She had not chosen silence. She had been killed. With that discovery, the case was formally reclassified. What began as a missing person investigation became a homicide. And the evidence that had once been quietly accumulating, the phone data, the financial trail, the surveillance footage, the burial site, now spoke with one voice. Taylor Wright had been murdered. Her body had been hidden. Her identity had been suppressed. And the person who knew exactly how long concealment might last was someone trained to understand evidence itself. What could not be erased had finally surfaced. And the case moved forward, no longer in search of Taylor Wright, but in pursuit of justice for her. The investigation had reached a point where evidence could no longer be ignored. Cell tower pings, financial records, surveillance footage, and the grim discovery on the MacArthur family farm all pointed toward a conclusion that no one wanted to face. And yet, in the midst of this, there was one person whose certainty refused to waver. Zach MacArthur, husband of Ashley MacArthur, former law enforcement officer, and a man confronting a nightmare he could not reconcile with reality. Zach was called in for police questioning. He arrived calm, collected on the surface, but the strain was unmistakable. His hands occasionally trembled, his jaw
What do you
tightened.
think happened to
His voice,
Taylor?
when he spoke, carried the weight of disbelief.
I couldn't tell you, Jason. I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
Here was a man caught between devotion to his spouse and the growing, undeniable body of evidence. From the outset, Zach denied any involvement. He insisted repeatedly, with calm repetition, sometimes bordering on pleading that he had done nothing wrong. He emphasized that he had no knowledge of Taylor Wright's disappearance or her death. "I didn't do anything," he stated firmly. "I don't know where she is. I don't know what happened." The investigators pressed. They detailed timelines, evidence trails, and data from Taylor's phone. They outlined the pings near the MacArthur farm, the messages exchanged after she was reported missing, and the money that had moved into accounts under Ashley's control. They reminded him of the surveillance footage showing the concrete and potting soil purchases. They described the scene at the farm, where Taylor's remains were found meticulously concealed. At every step, Zach's response returned to one central idea. His wife was incapable of murder. "She's super intelligent," he said. "She's got a background in forensics. She has a master's degree. That's not the kind of person who could just do something like that. It doesn't make sense." Even as investigators laid out the contradictions in Ashley's statements, the discrepancies between her accounts and the digital evidence, Zach's loyalty remained unshaken. The pings, the messages, the financial anomalies, all were explained away in his mind as misunderstandings, coincidences, or procedural errors. He struggled to reconcile the woman he knew, the wife he trusted, with the person implicated in one of the most chilling crimes investigators had encountered. I can't see her doing something like that," he repeated, voice taut with frustration and heartbreak. "It's sloppy. It's not her. She would never. I know her. I've lived with her. I know her. She's not like that." Investigators didn't push lightly. They asked pointed questions about phone ownership, about text messages sent from Taylor's device, and about financial transactions. They asked if he had knowledge of the purchases, the farm, or any contact Taylor might have had in her final hours. They probed whether he had assisted, knowingly or unknowingly, in concealing information. "I am not that guy," Zach insisted again and again. "I never have been. I never will be. I would never break the law. I would never help someone do anything like that. You've got to understand, I'm not that person. There was a palpable tension in the room. Every investigator knew the truth of what they had uncovered. Yet here sat a man whose psychological barrier, loyalty to his spouse, created a wall almost impossible to penetrate. The contrast was stark. The evidence was methodical, calculated, and damning. Zach's devotion was equally steadfast, almost defiant. He acknowledged the reality of what was happening around him. He recognized the seriousness of the investigation. He understood that his wife's narrative was under scrutiny. But no combination of timelines, surveillance data, or cell tower pings could shake his belief. "She's my wife," he said, quietly but firmly. "She's brilliant. She's careful. She's not violent. She's not capable of that. Whatever this is, whatever you think, it's not her. I can't believe it." Even when confronted with evidence pointing to deception discrepancies in her story, the location of Taylor's phone, the money deposited into Ashley's account, Zach framed it as an anomaly rather than a truth. He described the evidence as incomplete, misinterpreted, or circumstantial, emphasizing his certainty over the mounting facts. It was a loyalty rooted in years of partnership, in shared experiences and shared identity, and it held firm despite investigators presenting one undeniable contradiction after another. Throughout the interrogation, the narrative was clear. Zach MacArthur's reality had not shifted. Evidence could pile up, forensic analysis could confirm locations and actions, and yet he maintained his narrative. To him, Ashley was not a criminal. She was misunderstood, misrepresented, or trapped in circumstances beyond her control. The human element of the investigation, the unwavering belief in someone you love, clashed directly with the clinical, unyielding progression of forensic truth. The tension in the room was palpable, as a husband's loyalty became both a shield and a barrier to understanding, a lens through which reality was resisted. And yet, as investigators meticulously laid out the timeline, the data, and the physical evidence, a slow, inexorable reality began to emerge, a truth that would eventually be undeniable to everyone except the one person most emotionally invested, the husband who couldn't believe it. Zach MacArthur's stance in those interviews would later be referenced repeatedly in court, a portrait of unwavering loyalty, human love, confronting cold logic, and the psychological complexity of a partner refusing to reconcile the identity of someone they know with the actions that the evidence demanded. Even as the case built toward courtroom exposure, interrogation footage, and ultimate verdict, this act, the steadfast, almost heroic denial of a husband, would remain a defining moment, illustrating how love, trust, and blind loyalty can collide with forensic precision and irrefutable evidence in ways that no narrative, however compelling, can fully reconcile. The courtroom in Pensacola was silent, thick with anticipation, as the trial of Ashley Britt MacArthur entered its most pivotal phase. The jury sat forward, notebooks ready, eyes flicking between the defense table and the prosecution. Cameras captured the tension, but there was one pair of eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the entire case. Zach MacArthur, sitting a few rows behind, watching intently, heart heavy with belief and fear. Ashley sat at the defense table, composed, calm, almost unreadable. Her posture was straight. Her hands rested quietly in her lap. There was no tremor, no hesitation, no outward sign of the storm gathering behind the courtroom walls. She was trained in forensic observation, meticulous in attention to detail, and now that expertise became part of the public spectacle. The prosecution stood, ready to present evidence that would confront every word of denial, every explanation, every carefully constructed story Ashley had offered to investigators. They called for the police interrogation recording to be played. The screen flickered on. The courtroom leaned in. The camera followed Zach's face, tense, steadfast, refusing to believe what was coming. The footage began with Ashley being asked about Taylor Wright's phone, about why messages had been sent after Taylor was reported missing, and why the devices had appeared in proximity according to cell tower data. "I didn't have her phone," Ashley insisted. I'm aware it's weird, but I didn't have her phone. I didn't know." The interrogating officer pressed further, detailing the exact tower pings, the timestamps, and the messages. "Your phone and her phone were communicating off the same tower," the officer said. 8 minutes apart. Why do you have her phone? Or why is she with you?" Ashley's composure wavered, though only subtly. Her words were defensive, precise, calculated, but inconsistent. I wasn't with her. I don't know how that happened. I mean, it's possible she left it with some things she had, but I wasn't with her. The prosecution continued, juxtaposing her statements with bank records, surveillance footage, and the purchase of concrete and potting soil. Every inconsistency, every contradiction, every evasive answer was laid bare for the jury. The courtroom watched as a woman trained in evidence and concealment slowly revealed cracks in her narrative. Facts replaced ambiguity. Reality replaced denial. And then the camera returned to Zach MacArthur. His hands gripped the pew in front of him. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked back and forth between the screen and the table. The man who had once insisted his wife was incapable of murder now faced the cold visual proof of deception, manipulation, and concealment. There were no tears, no outbursts, just silence, loyalty slowly eroding under the weight of evidence that could not be disputed. Every misstatement, every inconsistency in Ashley's recorded interview chipped away at the fortress of belief he had built around her. The jury watched not only the technical evidence, the phone data, the financial transactions, the surveillance video, but the psychological unraveling. They observed a denial so deeply rooted in love and trust being replaced, moment by moment, by the reality of forensic and financial truth. Ashley's words, her explanations, the careful ways she tried to frame the events, all became part of a sequence that spoke louder than the officers, the charts, or the records ever could. The human element of deception was on full display. A friend, a wife, a trained professional, confronted with the very evidence she had thought she could manipulate. As the interrogation concluded on screen, the courtroom felt the shift. There was no dramatic outburst, no cinematic gesture of revelation, just the undeniable weight of facts. The once confident husband sat frozen, the lines of trust and belief eroding silently across his face. In that room, the prosecution did not just present evidence. They presented the collapse of denial itself. The jury did not simply see a murder investigation. They saw a husband's unwavering certainty confronted by reality, and a defendant whose intelligence and professional skill had been employed not to uncover truth, but to conceal it. This was the moment where the human and the factual collided, where loyalty met evidence, where love and disbelief were no match for digital footprints, bank statements, and forensic precision. The courtroom would never forget it. Zach MacArthur would never forget it. And for the jury, this was more than proof of guilt. It was a study in psychology, deception, and the way expertise can be weaponized. The stage was set for the final act. The verdict would come not just from law and evidence, but from the cumulative weight of every contradiction, every lie, and every hidden truth finally brought into the open. The courtroom waited in tense silence as the jury filed back in. Weeks of testimony, hours of evidence, and countless interrogations had led to this moment. The air felt heavy, every eye on the jury box, every ear straining to catch the foreperson's words. Outside the courtroom, the city of Pensacola buzzed unknowingly, unaware of the culmination of a case that had shaken a family and a community. The judge cleared her throat, her voice calm but authoritative. "Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson rose, voice steady but tinged with the weight of responsibility. "We have, Your Honor. In the case of the state of Florida versus Ashley MacArthur, we find the defendant guilty of first-degree premeditated murder with a firearm, as charged in the indictment." A murmur passed through the courtroom, quickly hushed by the judge's gavel. The verdict had been delivered. Guilty. The weight of that single word hung in the air like a physical presence. All eyes turned to Ashley MacArthur. She remained seated at the defense table, composed, almost detached, yet the room could sense the gravity of the moment pressed down on her. The man who had once defended her, Zach MacArthur, sat frozen, a mixture of disbelief, heartbreak, and dawning comprehension etched across his face. The husband who had insisted she was incapable of murder had finally been confronted with a truth that no loyalty could shield him from. The judge did not delay. She spoke with deliberate authority, leaving no room for interpretation. "Ashley MacArthur, having been found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt by a jury of your peers of first-degree premeditated murder with a firearm, I adjudicate you guilty. I hereby sentence you to life imprisonment with a mandatory minimum of 25 years in state prison." There was no hesitation, no plea for mitigation, no room for ambiguity. The sentence was absolute. Ashley MacArthur was remanded into state custody immediately. escorted from the courtroom under the watchful eyes of law enforcement. For Taylor Wright's family, the verdict brought a complicated closure. Her young son, who had already suffered the unthinkable, now had the assurance that the person who had betrayed the deepest trust in his mother's life would face justice. The community, shocked by the audacity of the crime and the cold precision of the cover-up, felt a cautious relief that the law had acted decisively. But the aftermath was more than legal. The damage of betrayal, masked as friendship, could not be measured in a courtroom. It lingered in empty homes, in unanswered questions, and in the haunting understanding that someone once trusted could weaponize professional knowledge to deceive, manipulate, and ultimately destroy. The case of Ashley MacArthur was a stark reminder. Loyalty, even love, is fragile when confronted by undeniable truth. Expertise and intelligence, when corrupted, can conceal the most horrific acts. Evidence does not bend for emotion. It does not care for devotion. It simply exists, a relentless arbiter of reality. As the courtroom emptied and the echoes of gavel strikes faded, the story of Taylor Wright and her tragic end remained a testament to human complexity, betrayal, and the stark power of truth. In the end, justice was served, but the emotional and moral cost, the shattered friendships, the lost life, and the irrevocable damage to those left behind lingered long after the verdict was read. If this story gave you insight into the dark complexities of trust, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of justice, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive true crime story. Share this video with friends and family so more people can see how loyalty, love, and expertise can be twisted and how evidence ultimately never lies. By subscribing and sharing, you help us continue uncovering the stories that demand to be told, stories that remind us sometimes truth is louder than devotion.